What's up, girls? I just read Utilitarianism by Stuart Mill. This is 1861 political pamphlet, essay, or short book, where he tries to update, I guess, the social idea of what utilitarianism is. Basically, at its most basic, utilitarianism as a concept is maximizing the most pleasure or happiness for every single member of a society, every single person in a governing body. And it's founded by Jeremy Bentham, who's one of the Enlightenment thinkers. People are very opposed to the idea of utilitarianism, typically, and Mill is basically trying to update the utilitarian argument by trying to, correct a couple misconceptions and update a few definitions. So, first he says, when people think of like utilitarianism at its worst, it's the idea that everyone is trying to maximize pleasure for themselves, and they typically think of like animal pleasures, like people drinking all the time, or like eating to the point of excess, or whatever. And he says, first of all, that is like a misunderstanding of hedonism or Epicureanism, because those belief systems are trying to maximize pleasure and also minimize pain. So like a true hedonist would actually not drink themselves sick, because they would incur a bill in the form of pain, in the form of a hangover, they would actually kind of, strive for moderation. If a hedonist was at a party, they would, in theory, have the most drinks they could without being hungover. So maybe they would have 2 drinks, maximize their pleasure at the party, and then have a very small hangover the next day, something like that. So he's saying first there's like a social kind of misconception of what it means to maximize everyone's pleasure. Then he tries to define, then he tries to change the idea of pleasure or happiness from Bentham's by saying basically that all pleasure is not created equal. And he basically goes on to say that, it's not bad to enjoy food or like alcohol or certain kind of lower pleasures, but the real valuable pleasures are pleasures of a cultivated mind, pleasures of, if you can educate yourself and become very interested and fascinated in music, or literature or art, or in painting a picture, those pleasures are basically infinitely renewing, and they're not very costly to yourself or to society. And then I think he says famously that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And he goes on this riff about how it's hard to have a universal definition of happiness or pleasure when people, there's basically no a priori definition of it, because people are so subjectively different. And he uses the example of like, a person who used to be dumb, who has then become smart, would never give up their intelligence to be better satisfied as a fool. So there's kind of a subjective issue with incentives, just in that people have an aversion to changing what they are, even sometimes in the pursuit of happiness. He also, he talks about Kant's categorical imperative, which is kind of a secular repurposing of the Christian idea of like, do unto others what you would have them do to you. Kant says you should treat everyone as ends instead of means. And Bentham says the difficult thing or sorry, not Bentham. John Stuart Mill says the difficult thing with pleasure and the pursuit of pleasure is that sometimes the pursuit itself becomes pleasureful. Like sometimes the pathology of the pursuit takes over. So for example, money has no value in itself, but it has a lot of utility for procuring value and valuable things, right? So you can use money to buy food, buy a house, but over time, if you're in the habit of getting money so you can then get those valuable things, the act of getting the money itself becomes pleasureful. The act itself, the pursuit, starts to make you happy. So the means become somewhat of an end, and it creates this paradox that makes pleasure or happiness even harder to define. What else? He talks about how, throughout the history of philosophy, it has been very difficult to define universally what is morally good. You might say that music is good because we receive pleasure from listening to music, but you can't necessarily say that it's good that we receive pleasure from listening to music, if that makes sense. So basically what John Stuart Mill is trying to do is to say, it's basically impossible to define what is morally bad or good. He's saying that all social political systems are faulty because they all kind of come to paradoxes at a certain point, including, communism, liberalism, a capitalist democracy, a authoritarian capitalist society. They all kind of come to paradoxes in which two maybe morally good things contradict each other, or two morally wrong things contradict each other. And he says the only real solution for this is to kind of create like a value system, like a mapping system in which you would decide, okay, at the primary map of meaning, this is going to be more important than whatever is in the secondary map of meaning, and then hopefully, ideally, nothing in the primary map of meaning would be contradictory. Yes, and then chapter 5, he is trying to create a definition of justice, because this is where one of the paradoxes of utilitarianism lies, in that, if it would make me really happy to rob my neighbor, and it wouldn't hurt my neighbor's feelings that much to be robbed, let's say he's very rich, then why wouldn't I rob him? Because that would be maximizing utility for both he and I relative to each other. And Mill says the idea of justice is very important. It does not exist as like an ephemeral thing in the state of nature. He tries to say justice itself is a utility, because without certain legal and moral rights and responsibilities, more utility is lost than gained, if that makes sense. It is better to, I guess this ties back to Kant's categorical imperative, is that by treating others as ends instead of means, it's more of a preventative structure that keeps people from doing bad rather than encouraging them to do good. But chapter 5, which is the last chapter of the book, he basically defines justice and tries to lay out the importance of justice within a utilitarian political structure. I'm out of time. This is John Stuart Mill on utilitarianism. Thanks for watching.